I'm live. Hello, Inara. And the chat works today. That's cool. So hello, welcome to the Temple of the Goddess. It's great being in the physical Temple of the Goddess when I say that. I have been kind of asked over and over again about the Council of Selves work and what it is, what it maybe can be like summed up as. And so I'm going to do my best today to give a little bit of information, but I'm also hoping for it to be an opportunity for some experiential stuff. And I welcome whoever's joining for, watching this. I assume likely not live. You should feel welcome to participate in this as much as you feel called, or just use maybe some opportunities that I'll present later to just think about what we're talking about. So there'll be kind of like some of the meditation focused timing, lives. There'll be some opportunity for you to be just kind of present with yourself. So, one of the pillars for me, working with the goddess is the opportunity to do inner work. And inner work for me is always connected to the mind in certain ways, but the heart in other ways. So when we do this, the one kind of caveat I want to make is if any of this feels a little too intense, please feel like it's okay to stop. Feel like it's okay to not take things beyond a certain level. Let your intuition kind of guide what feels right for you as we go. That's the one kind of thing up front that I want to mention. And then I'll just kind of move into a little bit of an overview of kind of what I'm hoping for us to look at today, which is, so this idea of a council of selves is, for me, the way that I've experienced it, though likely everybody will have their own kind of distinct flavor to the way that they're experiencing it as they go, is again kind of starting at the center, recognizing that the present moment, the here and now, is kind of an agreement that everybody's making, that we're all making, which accounts for our current baseline, our current cells that constitute our body, right? In 7 years, they'll be different. 7 years ago, they were different. And so we're just moving through a continuum of life on it. Where we are right now is where we're showing up, and where we can always come back to, no matter the relationship that we step into at any given time. So from there, the easiest, because we've already talked about here and now, kind of implying a temporal relationship, the first relationship that I think is easiest to consider ourselves stepping into when assembling the council, so to speak, is our child self and our elder self. Kind of joining the present self in this moment. And so I'm going to allow you an opportunity, if you feel so called, to welcome those beings, those aspects of you, however you experience that, without me saying too much yet. Elder you and child you. Even if you're 2 days old, there's always a younger. Even if you're 80, there's still an older. Just welcome them. You can pause, you can stop right here. In some ways, right, this is enough. Being able to be with ourselves in the state of the innocent, perhaps we could consider it. Who were you just when you came in? For you, this being might take on, I experience, anywhere from maybe an infant or up to about a 5-year-old child, somewhere in there, 5 to 7, typically. Kind of representing that first someone, representing, will show up, arriving, representing that first 5 to 7, or 0 to 7, somewhere in there. The elder you, maybe not the ancient you. My experience of the elder is, generally in that final state of vitality. There's still a vitality to an elder. And so we're not talking, last gasp version of you per se, but that competent, confident, effective elder you, maybe pre-retirement age, for most of us who are going to be showing up, who are in this somewhere between child and elder. But I think we can still hold ourselves, even at old age, with a relationship maybe to that being, maybe more as an embodied holding of that self as we move closer to it. I know at 40, I relate to it very differently than I did when I was 25. That's all I mean to say. Those beings can now, if we feel so called, be joined by I'm going to refer to as kind of the receptive self, the self that is in relationship to us from we could call this a feminine quality. And if it resonates to refer to it as a feminine quality, great. I relate to it through a relationship to femininity, my relationship to my feminine. But to universalize it, what I mean to say is the aspects of you that arrive when we consider a receptive principle. and the aspect of yourself that is in relationship to that. Yin and yang maybe kind of enters in. There's a dance of a binary quality, right and left, sure. Never good and bad, though. Never good and bad. Complementary opposites being our framework here. And then ourselves, when we might relate to ourselves as an active, expressive quality. I hold this within the framework of, as I relate to myself through my femininity, I relate to myself in my masculinity. But again, I don't believe that the way that we understand that masculine feminine divide fully applies here. This is just me being as fully inclusive as I can be with my understanding of it. But if very clear masculine and very clear feminine energies, as we have loaded them with our cultural relationship, shows up, I welcome you to invite that here fully. And I experience these beings kind of in a right and left sort of quality in my axis. I actually think it probably has more to do with right and left dominance with your hands, which one you'll put where. I tend to feel my masculine energy on my right side, and I tend to feel my feminine energy on my left side. I welcome wherever they want to stand in the circle with you. So at this point, I can say, I feel where they want to stand, where they want to be, where they want to sit with me. I remain in the center. I welcome, to give it words, my masculine self. I welcome my feminine self. You could stop here, go no further, and just take whatever time you need to be with this. And that would be enough. Yeah. So if you feel so called to move on from here with me, the next piece that I want to give us here, staying in the center, remembering that elder and child, masculine and feminine qualities are here. Beneath me, kind of in the earth, I feel my relationship to my primal self. It's my understanding that some marketing has come up around this word primal. But what I mean by this is all of the aspects of me that really emerge from my relationship to the animal being self that I am. The needs of, food, water, shelter. The aspects of me that developed specifically for the existence of those realities. So another word that we could perhaps use in addition to primal self would be animal self. Either feel appropriate. The realities of the animal you. I think rightfully, this typically includes our reproductive needs as well. These might take on different qualities, so there might be more than one being here, right? Just like there might be more than one being present already in any of these relationships so far. If so, ask me about it. So that animal relationship beneath me is where I hold it, just in relationship to this meditative state. And then above me, I feel I tend to like this framework of the higher self. So I tend to use that languaging. What I mean to say and what I welcome you to invite here is your relationship to, perhaps the superhero version of yourself, perhaps the, the parts of you that you feel are intrinsically, the way I refer to it, linked to nobility, your noblest self. We could be honest with ourselves and acknowledge that that's when we're well fed. That's when we're well rested. That's when we have, all the things we need. Though I believe we can aspire to being our noblest self when the chips are down as well. But in this moment, we relate this space above. For me, the word I'm using is nobility, but we could imagine the being of light that you have within you to express. The angelic self, I've heard some people refer to it through the lens of. Divine self, also completely acceptable framework. In my, kind of looking for words that might fit. But whoever shows up, mine is somewhat, my relationship to it is somewhat amorphous. It is very, light being sort of relationship. It's not doesn't need to take on more anthropomorphization than necessary. So in front of you sits the elder, behind you the child. We might say on one side of us the anima, on one side of us the animus, the masculine and feminine qualities of our soul. Beneath us the animal, above us the angel. To give it poetry, but the highest self. And just, if you feel so called for a minute, just be with all of that there. It's quite a bit on its own. 7 beings making a decision. 7 beings sitting together. 7 beings in conversation. The higher self, the animal self, the anima and animus, the masculine and feminine, the elder and the child might, from this point, have their own journey to take you on. So if you feel so called so as to be with your experience at this point, thank you so much for kind of joining in with the assembling the Council of Selves. Nothing more is required from me at that moment. And deep gratitude to all of those parts of you that were able to join us today and maybe had something to share with you. And from there, I might just say a few more words as some more crows fly by on these relationships. But what I want to introduce is conceptually a couple of the other selves that, from a therapeutic standpoint, might want to be considered when going into inner work. The big buzzword for this that I want to kind of start this side of the conversation with is the shadow self. Obviously, for me, it's one of the most useful ways of stepping into relating to not hating the parts of you that might be having a hard time. The goal of shadow work is not to destroy the shadow. The goal of shadow work is not to defeat the shadow. The goal of the shadow work is to relate to the shadow until it is just another part of you. And it no longer needs to live in shadow because it's fully accepted for who it is. So that's where I want to start the conversation about shadow. I'm going to end up probably doing a lot of eventual work on here about shadow work in different explorations. But I mostly just really want to introduce it early on around the Council of Selves, as this is not someone that is meant to be seen as evil. In these complementary opposites, if evil does exist, it would only exist in relationship to the most perfect, right, non-evil force. It would never be like there's me and then there's evil me. Because guess what? You're somewhere in between a lot of different things, likely. And so the shadow work, super duper important. I want to welcome it because that might want to be here presently for any number of people who are watching this video in the future. So I want to give gratitude to our shadows. Another set of beings, or just one, being that might want to become present in the Council of Selves, are the wounded selves, as I kind of have experienced them in my own work. And so, and they do seem to be a somewhat universal experience that we somewhere along the way get our ass kicked by life. And sometimes that energy takes on a very specific sort of quality to it. I think when I was doing a lot of my inner work, I can recall 4 or 5 distinct versions of myself that had experienced a specific wounding and were holding on to that. Allowing them to be present in the conversation. I'm recalling certain places that I've stood in the world with them at times. They might feel called to be present in the space, and if so, amazing. And it's deep work with all of that, but again, it's from the place of deep relationship, not judgment, not domination, not defeat, not warfare, not these sorts of kind of violent, pathologized languages, at least from my understanding of the way that the goddess has kind of presented this work to me over the years. Yeah, and just really allowing yourself to be with anything that shows up when we're calling the council. There might be the you with a specific question. There might be the you who's, gone to college and the you that hasn't gone to college, right? This is a unique practice in that you never quite know what's inside until you look. But starting with yourself at all of these different layers, I think is a weight just dropped. But all to say, as I'm moving this kettlebell, which just created a loud thud that I love, I really, all I was going to finish saying is that's enough before that dropped. That's enough. You don't need to go any further with it. You don't need to intellectualize it. You don't need to understand it. You don't need to control it. You just need to listen to who's there and enter into the deepest relationship you can, because it's you. So, yeah, I'm going to leave that section there, talking about kind of outside shapes that will arrive and arise when assembling the council. Of selves. The final thing that I want to do is talk a little bit about what I'm talking about. Which is just to say, there is a number of individual techniques that are being married here in my own thinking around presenting this material. So this is kind of like my version of the spoken bibliography, maybe at the end of what I'm talking about. The first and I think most accessible baseline for anybody to kind of explore in more depth what I'm talking about on their own could look into the foundational texts having to do with IFS. And I think that all of that will be useful if we just want to hold it from a psychological standpoint. I think a lot of these techniques that I'm looking at can be held, and this is important to me, can be held within a context of existing research showing that there is therapeutic value in the technique. So that being just the baseline of the technique could just be left there, right? You could just see it through that sort of a psychological lens, and I think it would remain valuable in and of itself. The next layer deeper that I want to go into my, kind of the input that comes in is more of unfortunately, the parlance is to refer to it as shamanic. It's just all sorts of problems with that word. But it is, I think, popular enough in use that it's a useful word to retain, despite its problematic reality. But what does that mean, shamanic, in this context? Which is to say that once we step outside of a material reductionist worldview and we imbue the world with a living quality to it, outside of the purely material reality, there is a way to hold these selves through this lens of sacredness. I find that lens of sacredness gives us access to that next layer of kind of like taking on a spiritual reality, an energetic reality. There's, also just within the framework of once it takes on that lens, it then includes the previous lens, right? We're talking an exercise of inclusion, right? So my energetic relating to it is infused with my emotional relationship to it, which is infused to my, holding it within the lens of the sacred and their connection to where they come from, so to speak. So the way I would hold the higher self in this kind of spiritual relationship is, and this will come in later in other ways, this is all meant to be stacked, but with this idea I talked yesterday about above has a quality to it. And so once I'm relating to it from that relationship to above, unfortunately, the very loaded word heaven, sky is another word, space is another word. But what I mean when I say heaven is the place of the undifferentiated light. The place of total unity. From that emerges what we refer to as light, the love and light crowd. When they're talking about light, that's what they're talking about. And so this divine self, this higher self, is in some ways me in relationship to that light. And so you see, it takes on an almost devotional lens, and that by engaging in deep relating to those aspects of self, my feminine self, I can, for me, relate to it, that next layer out, as how am I relating to the feminine? How am I relating to the masculine? How am I relating to, with the animal self, right? How am I relating to my living environment, the world around me, the ground, the earth, the spirit of the earth, the world soul, as I kind of refer to it as. That's a sacred relationship, and so my relationship to my animal self is my relationship to the earth. Interesting. That's that next, just to give some examples of that next layer out of, from the utterly psychological, emotional, biopsychosocial, emotional sort of framework outward, that next layer into the spiritual world, and the way that those live within each other. They're always meant to. They never need to be removed, and they never need to touch. They can be the divider plate where all your little tastes go into, and I think they still have value to contemplate, wherever you feel called, wherever you feel comfortable. There's deep, deep work around the psychological stuff. If that's where you need to be for 10 years, super fine, super important. May many, many benefit from your work. It's a beautiful thing. So that's that shamanic layer that the spiritual layer. Within this framework, though, there's the spiritual layer, and this is the wonky part that connects all of it, is that I perceive the ecstatic to be the bridge between these two realms, essentially. And the ecstatic techniques that you need to employ will be your own. And that's, I think, why shamanic still kind of holds better than, for me, when I'm talking about it conceptually, holds better for me than pure mysticism, because we are fundamentally relating to the parts of us that are us. And so the sense qualities of your experience are central in this way. And so this is where I'll talk about, like, kind of the final input, which is, I brought up IFS, which is psychological. I brought in this idea of kind of the spiritual shamanic realm. But the piece that I think is important is the actual techniques that make it a shamanic relationship, and kind of state outright that there are so many techniques that I likely only know a handful. One of the, at least more approachable Western sources for discussion around this is Jung's active imagination, to keep it in the psychological, but give us maybe, like, you read some of Jung's Red Book and Black Book, you realize he was blurring the lines here quite a bit when he was experimenting with this around the time that I believe the goddess was first coming into being. And he was heavily influenced by, Eastern as well as Western esoteric constructs. And so he was really being influenced, I believe, by his trying to wrap his head around these actually much more effective, in some instances, techniques than what he was toying with at the time. Western psychology was just getting its feet. I think we can't overstate the importance of a psychedelic lens on all of this, which is just to say you don't need to take drugs to relate to the psychedelic, but what I relate to the psychedelic is techniques that allow us to limit executive functioning enough to go the places that we might want to stop ourselves from going inside of ourselves. And Tantra falls into this list as well. Tantra held within the non-sexualized framework here, held within for me, the concept that has guided my relationship to this the most, and what I believe I'm hoping to bring into this work, on behalf of the goddess, is the ability to allow oneself to fully incarnate, to fully welcome into our being, to be fully taken over by these parts of ourselves for a time, to really allow ourselves to be shown. How does my body feel when this part of me is allowed full control, full presence, full access to options? What comes into me in that way? Not, whatever people are talking about Tantra as in the public presentation of it. I can't speak to it. But that's what I mean when I talk about a tantric relationship to it. But these are ecstatic techniques, essentially, that allow us to push the boundaries of our conceptions of reality. These psychedelic playing at the edges of control and surrender, playing at the edges of what am I making up and what am I receiving. These are big kind of, it's the work of a lifetime, right? I mean, when you whatever you're going to be driven toward, whatever you're going to be guided toward, it's the work of a lifetime, no matter what. You don't need anything else. You have everything you need is, kind of the way I think about it in terms of being able to really come into deep relationship with yourself. So just to kind of recap here around the inputs that I'm considering, being the psychological from Jung forward to IFS and some of the other active imagination depth frameworks for considering what's happening with this technique of assembling the selves. and the shamanic or ecstatic, mystical, spiritual, as these kind of like concentric rings that hold you. Just the you sitting in a dark, quiet space with the child, the elder, the masculine, the feminine, the high, the divine, the higher self, and the animal self. Maybe the shadows present, maybe the wounded selves are present, maybe something else is present. And so the technique can be taken very far. It can be played with in different ways for a long time. I find that if we're doing the work is showing up. So it unfolds through your life. Don't be afraid to show up to your life, because at the center, this is the most important thing, is that you are always at the center of the technique. All of these parts, all the places you go, all the things you explore, etc., it's all fun, it's cool, but it's here, it's you, it's now, it's what's happening. So there will be periods where you need this a lot, and there will be periods where the goal is you need very little time to be able to drop in, say, hey, what are we all needing, everybody? Where are we at? We all feel good? We all feel good. Right, because I was already acting in accordance with everybody. I wasn't deviating outside of that too much. I've already been for me, this is what I mean when I say in integrity. All of me is fully present, and we're going because we all chose it together. And for me, that's the commitment that comes from this practice. Whatever your choice, all of you is choosing it. There's no part of you sabotaging. There's no part of you that's trying to lead you astray. There's no part of you that's arguing. There's no part of you that's saying no, because you have gained your own consent is the way I truthfully think about it. And the trick of that is that makes you really good at knowing what you consent to and what you don't. And for me, this is one of the essential components of being able to fully step into your sovereignty from a place that is not assuming desensitization or dehumanization. And I believe that those are things that are imposed as opposed to natural. So we are looking, I will admit that the final piece here is that you are a very, very, very smart animal. And so you have a lot more that you can explore inside of yourself, but it does not fundamentally remove you from the natural system that you inhabit. And so being able to acknowledge that this process is about the joining with the natural impulses, the natural you, the unconditioned, untrained, primordial you. And that is my understanding of how I received the teachings as I went. It's not particularly convenient given our current world setting. So I'll finish with a disclaimer and say, just like an author I once really enjoyed that I saw give a talk said to me, you know, don't write unless you can't not write. You know, don't take this stuff way off down the road unless you can't not. There's always so much time. Life is long. It doesn't need to be rushed. And so while there can be a draw to do it all very quickly, to go explore all the depths and all the heights and, you know, all the nitty gritty in between, you know, I'll welcome us all to really take our time and to really be very clear on the changes that developing a wild sovereignty, an undomesticated sovereignty, can have for our lives is it can be problematic. So that's my final disclaimer that I'll leave us with today. Thank you so much for joining for this presentation on the Council of Selves. Took on a very expansive quality toward the end there. Really grateful for the opportunity to go there. And I deeply appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk about this. Kind of like all of it, I was unclear if I would ever, say this stuff out loud. So, yeah, great to be here. Great to talk about it. Thanks so much.